Katashe Solutions and Secretary General at Access. Over the past decade, I've worked across finance, technology, mission-driven ecosystems, helping scale startups across APAC while building for public good. So KatKast is where we explore the real mechanics of innovation, from decentralized governance, staking policy, to inclusive finance, on-chain education, and the future of public on-chain infrastructure. So if you care about how systems scale and who they serve, you're in the right place. So let's dive in. Mark, my guest today is Mark, and he's a very, very exciting guest I've been meaning to bring on board for a very, very long time. We're going to be talking about stable coins today, which aren't just code or collateral, by the way. They're a promise that what you hold today will still be worth $1 tomorrow. But promises only matter if they're enforceable. So either through law, through audits, or through code. And turning that promise into reality requires collaboration from the private sector with regulators setting guardrails and the private sector, issuers, auditors, builders, making the systems both trustworthy and innovative. So if Asia can get a balance right, it's not just safe, it unlocks adoption and capital flows at scale. So this is exactly what we'll be diving in today, the governance of stablecoins and how assurance gaps can be closed. With my guest, Mark Christianos. Did I get that right, Mark?
That's good enough.
Mark is an associate director at Six Blocks Audit, a member of the CCSS steering committee, and a contributor to ISO standards. Mark, welcome to KatKast.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe we can start with your own journey. What brought you into the Web3 assurance journey? And from there, we can maybe deep dive into what I've read about your writings on the assurance gaps.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
My history comes from, in the cybersecurity part, my history comes from PCI DSS, which is a credit card information security standard. And it's focused on any organization that actually takes your credit cards. They should have proper security in place to protect your credit cards. And the standard's known as PCI DSS. And I've been auditing or assessing under that standard for 9 years now. And so it's mainly in the Web 2 space, so banks, large retail, also things like online marketplaces. And it was a very, it's a very safe journey because these systems that I'm auditing, they've been in place for maybe 30, 40 years, especially if you look at some banks and large retail. And so it's mainly just an exercise when you go in and check and everything's there and it's all good. And I decided to get into the blockchain space around about 2021 because I was quite interested in the space and also the security, the cyber security parts of it. And so I got in around about 2022, at the height of the bull market. And I got into a couple of liquidity pools, and of course, one of them collapsed, and I lost all my investment and so forth. And I'm going, wow, this is pretty cool. And so I got a good a feel for Web3 at that stage. And then looking around, I was just amazed at the amount of rug pulls and hacks that were occurring because, like from where I come from, a bank doesn't get hacked, right? Large retail firms generally don't get hacked. And so I was just looking, and almost daily there were just all these hacks. And so I started looking around to see, well, is there any type of assurance out there for customers? And I found CCSS, which is the cryptocurrency security standard. And that is basically 100% focused on Web3 cybersecurity. And so I approached C4, which is the certification body, and I asked them, is there an auditor's program? I want to become an auditor because I basically want to try and clean up this wild west called Web3. And they basically said, no, we don't have an auditor's program. We're a non-profit. We only work on volunteers. And so I basically donated about 9 months of my time, part-time, and I established the auditing program for CCSS. And funny enough, it's based on PCI DSS, so it's quite rigorous. And so then my journey just extended more and more down the rabbit hole of Web3 security. And then around about the last year or so, I'm also helping regulators, mainly in the Commonwealth, understand how to actually assess decentralized platforms and understand Web3 tech. And it's a very hard journey for a lot of these regulators, especially the smaller countries that don't have any in-house expertise. So my involvement there is educating them, understanding how to approach assessment or audit. And then if they don't want to deal with that, then normally a panel of experts is established, and all these auditors go in, external auditors, and when a licensee comes to a jurisdiction, the regulator will say, we'll choose from this pool of auditors, and we want them to audit you, and then the auditor sends the audit report to the regulator, so they get a very good level of assurance in terms of the licensee's security posture.
So maybe to the non-auditors out there, Mark, in our audience, can you share a little bit about the definition of assurances in the audit role and why it's important?
Assurance is basically, for example, when you audit against a standard like CCSS or ISO 27001, people want some type of assurance that this organization is taking security seriously. And so for the stakeholders, they can be in people like us, customers of these platforms. They can be regulators, they can be underwriters for insurance and so forth. So they need comfort to know that this platform is taking security seriously. And we call that an assurance. And there's different types of assurance depending on who the stakeholder is.
Yes. And I think with the assurance journey that you've mapped out based on your own personal experience, getting into the space, having your money rug pulled, and then really like pioneering standards, right? With C4, like with 9 months in of your time, how has that shaped up for you? Let's with the on the regulatory side, right? So I'm curious to unpack that a little bit more. So let's start with maybe one part of the assurance journey, reserves, right? In the context of stablecoin governance, users want to know, is the money really there or is it not? So the U.S. Genius Act in the US as a comparative model insists on 100% liquid reserves. Singapore's MES goes further with one-to-one backing, segregation of assets even, and monthly attestations. So whereas the Commonwealth draft, to zoom up a little bit more in our region, takes a lighter, more principle-based approach, and I know you've been contributing to that model as well. Mark, do you think laws should mandate not just solvency, but also proof of reserves, CCSS key level audits, like what MES is kind of inching towards?
Yeah, so the basically I'm helping with the Singapore Standards Council on creating what they consider to be a TRM plus. So right now, there's experts around the world that are helping the Singapore standards create this TRM plus, which is basically addressing the unique properties of blockchain-based systems, e.g. virtual assets, digital assets, and so forth. So there's the Commonwealth, right? So you talked about the Commonwealth. So there's 56 countries in the Commonwealth, Singapore, New Zealand, And so underneath the Commonwealth, there's actually an administrative layer. It's like the UN, and they have policymakers. And so these policymakers create what they term model law. It's like templates to help countries, especially the poorer countries, create law without pulling in very expensive experts from around the world or having resources in their own country. So they use these templates, and the model law can address all types of different things. And so there's a model law for stable coins. And so I was part of the working group. There was actually, there's maybe 34 experts from around the world, bank governors, finance ministers, all around the Commonwealth contributing to this model law. And it's very exciting model law. It's quite comprehensive. And currently, the draft version of the model law, so it's completed. It's now in a certain type of draft where all the attorney generals of each Commonwealth country get a copy of this draft, and then they review it to see, if they're happy with it and needs changes and so forth. Now, the Commonwealth model law on stablecoins has a tiered system. So you have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3/tier 0. Tier 1 are the stablecoin issuers that can really impact a country's financial institutions, right? So like what we call systemic risk. And so at the tier 1, we're talking about if there's ever a bank run or the depegs or so forth, it could impact the financial mechanism of a country, right? So they're very, very, important. And so there is one-to-one backing for tier 1 and I believe tier 2 as well. So they also talk about high quality assets as well, liquid assets. So again, it's like the rest of them where you basically, you can't even have, I think at tier 1, you can't even have other virtual assets in there. They've got to be high liquidity, high grade backing, and it's one-to-one. And it goes down. So I think the tiered model is quite unique in that and for example, the model law actually addresses DAOs. So DAOs that are creating stable coins, that's addressed in the model law. You've got algorithmic stable coins are also addressed in the model law, which is quite unique, as you can imagine. I mean, I don't think the Genius Act even wants to go down the algorithmic stablecoin route. But what this model law, one of the key reasons there's a difference between the model law is that it's created for countries, whereas the Genius Act is basically created for the banking sector in America, right? There's a problem that the US has in terms of this type of thing, basically, federal and state and so forth. And so the model law doesn't even look at that because that's not a problem in the Commonwealth. So Americans, I believe, are using the Genius Act to basically fix a problem that exists in America. The Commonwealth doesn't have this problem. And the Commonwealth model law is addressing, trying to basically accommodate all the different countries in the Commonwealth, from first world to second, third world, whatever. And so there's also a really good approach to the model law called basically equivalence, where if one country, say Singapore, adopts the model law, then other Commonwealth countries can actually be recognized by Singapore regulators. And so if you've got an issuer in different jurisdictions in the Commonwealth, they don't have to do the same type of due diligence in each country in the Commonwealth. They can be recognized that at least one jurisdiction has already adopted them and gave them the tick of approval. So there's this whole thing about inclusion and actually having countries working together for the better good. And another key principle of the model law is also talking about inclusion. So we've got, the unbanked. How do you actually allow the unbanked to benefit from stable coins? And so the model law also approaches the unbanked situation as well. A couple of the experts, including Loretta Joseph, who is the key principal guide for the stablecoin. She's exceptionally talented, and she was the one that actually drove the stablecoin model law to success. She's always hugely focused on the unbanked and how we can actually bring them in and benefit from these types of new technologies.
No, that's great. I love the perspective you gave around how it's country specific. So with the US Genius Act, it's targeted to its specificities within their banking sector, right? Whereas within the Commonwealth countries, all 56 of them, if they choose to opt in, I believe. So it's more based on, okay, these are the levels of different socioeconomic incomes within each country, and there is a mandate for inclusivity. So just to unpack that a little bit more, does that mean, like, say, if a Commonwealth country adopts this standard, are there any exemptions, like, or is it just that, okay, we as the Commonwealth, we recognize each other's sovereignty, and the way you would apply these standards in a
Yeah,
harmonized way?
that's the whole thing of this equivalence, and basically regulators being able to identify different jurisdictions within the Commonwealth, and what they call passporting. So it basically reduces the friction of issuers who are across jurisdictions trying to prove to each regulator in each jurisdiction that they're worthy enough to get a license. The tiering model is good because, like the Genius Act, it's kind of like focus for banks, right? Right now is banks, so only banks or the other higher financial institutions can participate or can issue stablecoins. And the model law, the tiering structure allows for innovation and new technology to come in. For example, the support of algorithmic stablecoins. The model law is not just saying, no, you can't use it. What they're doing is they're saying, yes, you can introduce an algorithmic stablecoin, but there's obviously lots of sandbox and ring fencing to go around, but it's not a blanket no. And so that allows regulators to actually monitor the innovation that's occurring and then adapt accordingly. So who knows, algorithmic stablecoins might become a lot more safer in the future, and therefore the regulators are not stifling innovation by just having a blanket no. And the other thing too is the model law isn't just for banks. It's for fintech. It's for anyone to come in. So there's a whole lot of thing about bringing in innovation and allowing these smaller entities to actually innovate and bring, this type of technology into the smaller levels.
So, for example, like stablecoin issuers that are startups, for example, if they want to enter the Commonwealth, new digital Commonwealth, as I should maybe put it, if this law comes into effect, how would the law support them in the tiering system? Like, say if they just want to issue a token for communities that are unbanked, for example, in Indonesia. What does the draft currently provide for?
The model law accommodates for that. The tiering system, there's different, for tier one being the big players, there's obviously a lot of requirements. For example, there's 24/7 continuous, what they call real-time monitoring of reserves. And those reserves, the outputs have to be publicly accessible. Right? So literally it's POR in real time. But in the lower tiers, the entry level, the startups, the ones that are focused on a particular, as you said, some type of particular service or so forth, or demographic, they don't have those stringent requirements. They have requirements, of course. There's got to be some type of prudential requirements in there, but it's not as strict as tier one. So there's like CCSS. CCSS has different levels as well. For cybersecurity, key management, it has level one, which is for startups who don't, necessarily have the big bucks to spend on this advanced stuff. So they come in at level one, and then there's level two, which is mid-tier. So that's basically just improving and fortifying your protections. And then there's level three, which is, basically you've got global exchanges where, the risk of, systemic contagion or basically losing a lot of customers' funds, e.g. FTX. That's at level three. They're required, basically, you should be expected that there'll be at level three, which is the most rigorous and has all the requirements applied on them.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you did mention there's this requirement for bigger financial institutions to have continuous 24/7 monitoring on chain. And here's the tension, right? Like on chain money moves in seconds, but some audits are monthly attestations, like what MAS mandates. So by the time they're published, they're kind of stale. So I'm just curious, do you think we should mandate this real-time assurances, like making proof of reserves reporting very dynamic to keep up with on-chain movements? Like I know it's a little bit difficult for startups, but I'm just curious to know your thoughts on this tension.
I think it is required, and I think the technology is there. And I mean, I'm not 100% across it, but there are products out there that I'm aware of that actually provide this continuous monitoring for POR.
Yeah.
So the technology's there. In terms of cost, I'm not sure, but I think it. The tiering, obviously tier one, you're talking billions and billions of dollars of funds, right? So the cost to them of continuously monitoring is realistic, whereas in the lower tiers, it's not required. So we're basically, the model law is there to actually not only allow innovation by not stifling certain approaches to stable coins, but it's also acknowledging the fact that, there's small startups and fintechs and so forth that are not banks, that are not financial institutions, that may have great ideas and may focus on certain demographics. And, this model law supports them and allows regulators to license them.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. I think that definitely encourages innovation in the space, and and gives them some breathing room to mature, and grow their runway before they become more institutionalized. And in assurance, Mark, I've read some of your writings where you did say, reputation often beats expertise. So the nobody gets fired for hiring IBM mindset. Like, I'm just curious, like, do you think regulators and policymakers will end up defaulting to the big four instead of niche experts who actually are domain experts in Web3?
Yeah, the assurance camp, it's very real. So basically, I'll tell you, there's one story. I basically had a consultant approach me. There was a very large exchange, and one of the regulators that they had a license for in a certain jurisdiction, the regulator wanted some additional assurance about key management activities. And the regulator was basically suggesting CCSS, because CCSS is a key management standard for cryptocurrency. That's it. It's extremely rigorous. Lots and lots of really well thought out controls and so forth. And so the consultant contacted me because I'm on the steering committee for CCSS. I'm one of the people that write the standard. I also wrote an implementation book on how to implement CCSS. So, and I was, I was the first one in the world. I audited, Fireblocks is one of my clients and so forth, right? So I've got a certain skill set, you could say. And the other option is that the consultant was telling me, well, they're looking at you because you're kind of like the expert, one of the experts, but we also need to look at one of the top fours. And I thought, that's cool. And then a couple of days later, the consultant came back and says, they chose the top four. They knew that the top four didn't have a clue about what they were actually looking at, but the fact is that the brand, they thought that the regulators would be impressed by the brand, and it'd give them additional, it would give them additional comfort. Whereas you got one of the people that actually wrote the standard, who wrote the book, who actually actively audits under the standard, they completely ignored that person and went for what we call brand prestige. So, you can be bitter and twisted about it, but at the end of the day, you can actually see where companies come from in terms of using the top four. And it's, it's very big in Web 2 space, but in the Web 3 space, it gets a little bit more difficult to prove, because the top four and the other traditional auditing firms and financial firms, they have a methodology that is old school, that doesn't fit well in Web 3. For example, trying to apply SOC 2 in a decentralized environment is a bit tough. So what you have is that the regulators I deal with, I talk about domain experts. I talk about the fact is that what you should be getting assurance from is domain experts. These are the people that generally do not work for the top four or do not work in traditional audit firms or financial audit firms. These type of experts work in academia, so they might be completely focused on blockchain tech. These are the experts that contribute to standards such as the ISO's new standards for blockchain and DLT. It's named TC307. And they're also experts who started up businesses in Web3, grassroots businesses, Hacken, Hellborn, Hashlock, all these grassroots organizations. That is where the domain expertise is. They're the ones that understand decentralization. They're the ones that understand systemic contagion of smart contract daisy chains. I mean, you go back to a top four and say, talk to me about systemic contagion for smart contracts in a daisy chain scenario, and one of them is connected to an oracle. Tell me what the risks are. The top four, the situations I've been involved with and the SOC 2 reports I've seen, I don't have much. I don't have much faith currently. Yeah. And so that's where I see the domain experts, and that's who I collaborate with all the time. For example, with ISO, the ISO new standards for blockchain and DLT, you've got experts from around the world contributing to over 20 standards that ISO is creating for blockchain and DLT. And the ones that I'm dealing with, not one come from top four. They all come from academia or grassroots organizations. Now, there obviously will be top four people involved as experts in some of these standards, but I haven't seen them yet in the standards that I work for. So it's quite a contentious subject, but at the end of the day, if you look where they come from, SOC 2, Type 2, and you look at their audit methodologies and how they approach things, and things such as, you engage one of these top four and you pay a lot of money and they bring in a graduate. And I've heard stories of basically graduates coming in and the client having to train the graduate on how to understand blockchain tech. So, it's not all the time, but these are the experiences that I've heard about. And so that's what I talk about. The assurance gap is that Web3 is very complex, and you chuck in decentralization, you chuck in DAOs, you chuck in oracles, you chuck in, immutable smart contracts, and the traditional audit methodologies don't really cut it in this space. And, the other thing too is you'll see exchanges and other full custody providers, they'll talk about, hey, we're SOC 2 Type 2, we're ISO 27001, trust us. But a lot of them, what they don't understand, the exchanges and the full custody providers, and also the customers and regulators, some of them, is that these standards or these attestations only cover baseline security controls, patch management, configuration management, change management, access management, all the basics, but they don't address the unique properties of blockchain and DLT systems. And so what you do is you have a gap. Yes, they've got good foundations and basic security controls, but the door's wide open or there's no roof on the building because they haven't used CCSS to ensure that their key management activities, are basically secure for how cryptography works in Web3.
Yeah, just to lay out the landscape of these standards. I do get these standards a bit mixed up every once in a while. So just to clarify, SOC 1 is just for internal controls reporting, am I right? And SOC 2 is more for
financial. It's financial from memory, and SOC 2 starts getting into security. So
Okay.
yeah,
Customer
it's I
data.
mean, for what its objective is, SOC 2 is very good. But what I'm saying is that you're basically having an attestation retrofitted into Web3, which works in a completely different way from Web2 systems. For example, Web2, you've got executive governance, you've got a board of directors, you've got everyone who knows everyone, you've got a centralized systems, you've got centralized everything. But if you go into the Web3 space where you may have a community DAO, a community-based DAO where governance is done via the community via tokens, you have decentralized smart contracts, all daisy chained together. Then you have decentralized oracles. Then you have cross bridges. Then you have all types of other stuff like this. And of course, the innovation's going at breakneck speed. It's just that these type of controls, patch management, change management, all that type of stuff is great, but it's not addressing a thing like how do you deal with decentralized oracles or smart contracts. The risk profile is not there.
Yeah, that's interesting because I'm not sure whether this context applies to CoinGecko. They recently announced they had SOC 2 certification, and then they did a little bit of management transitioning. Bobby, their co-founder, became CEO, and then TM, their other co-founder, became president. So it's become like a crypto API data API business that intends to track like the next billion tokens or whatsoever. But yeah. So I found it interesting. Like, oh, okay, they're really chuffed about their SOC 2 application, which is great. But I do wonder like how much of it is fit for purpose. Yeah.
I mean, SOC 2 is mainly, I think, it's mainly for in the American space where investors and everyone expects SOC 2 because somehow that's the big thing over there. Where for me personally, I feel that the rest of the world tends to lean more on ISO 27001, which is a prescriptive security standard, right? For example, with SOC 2. You get the client to write up a service description. Basically, this is what we do. It's an assertion. This is what we do. This is what we have. These are the roles we have. These are the controls we have, and so forth. And then it's up to the auditor to look at the assertion that they've made, the statements, and actually prove that the statements are true and valid. Now, that's a very oversimplified approach to that. Whereas if you look at something like CCSS or ISO 27001, it says you've got to have this control in place and it's got to work like this. In SOC 2, there's no control catalog in terms of you must have this control and it must work like that. And so that gives you flexibility in terms of what control you implement to meet your objectives, how the control functions, and it's all up to the user and basically the auditor to gain some level of assurance that the control's fit for purpose. But in the ISO world and the CCSS world, where it's very prescriptive, you are told best practice, this is what you do. And in these types of things, it's a lot more needed, because a lot of the times people don't actually understand that you really do need to have a certain control here because it's absolutely vital, right? You need to think about the risk of using a single signature wallet, for example. So, in CCSS, there's actually a requirement that says if you're considering using a single signer wallet, e.g., like a hot wallet, you need to understand the risks of actually having that wallet in place, and those risks need to be addressed, treated. There's nothing like that really in ISO 27001 and definitely not in SOC 2.
Wow.
So this is where you see the assurance gaps. And, like another big thing, smart contracts are so absolutely vital for stable coins, right? Tokenization, stable coins are the foundation for all these things. But if you look at a control from ISO 27001 or SOC 2, and you look at that, it's kind of like, you should get an audit done maybe once a year. software code audit once a year, and maybe if there's a significant change, you get an audit.
Yeah.
But that doesn't fit in Web3, because one slight little change to smart contract code in Web3 could mean the difference between you having your customers' funds and you not having them in a couple of seconds when someone finds a vulnerability and hacks it.
Yeah.
So you can see the risk of smart contract audit reports are absolutely critical. The risk goes through the roof. And for example, with CCSS, it addresses that. It says basically every change that you do on your smart contract, any change, it switch a variable from on to off. You need to go to a skilled smart contract auditor and just say, do I need to have an audit for this? I've just made this little change. Do I need to have an audit? And if they come back and say, no, it's just a slight change, that's fine. But if they go, yes, you do, because what you've done is you completely reverse the logic of your smart contract. So that's where these types of Web3 focused frameworks and standards really understand and consider the risks that are involved here, because the risks are a lot more different in some cases than the Web3 world, where SOC 2 and ISO 27001 come out of.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It sounds like, Web2 frameworks like ISO 27002 and SOC 1 and SOC 2 are more suitable for Web2 frameworks, so to say, because it doesn't really tackle like the increasing risk factors in Web3, like what you mentioned, the smart contract vulnerabilities, the key compromises, oracle manipulation, and when I did try to read like the current drafts, right, like the Commonwealth draft just mentioned AML in passing, like to put in some guardrails, and the US Genius Act focuses more on issuer solvency, but like, do you see this? But it's kind of silent on these Web3 risks, right? Do we need to codify this kind of crypto native standards like CCSS into the law? Like, how do you see this playing out? Yeah.
Oh, well, the interesting thing is that my participation in the Commonwealth model law for stablecoins, and we just started the tokenization model law now. We've just started that. The cybersecurity part, I was on the team that wrote it. And so a lot of the CCSS requirements have actually been put into this model law, comparing to other regulations around the world for stablecoins and also virtual assets. This model law has a very, very comprehensive cybersecurity part. We tackle oracles, we tackle smart contract auditing, we tackle key management at the blockchain DLT level. So this is where you can actually see, because unfortunately the model law is not in public draft right now, so it's very hard to get information out, because it's at that stage where only the attorney generals and the government of countries can look at it. But the stuff that I'm talking today is giving you a bit of a good overview of it. But the cybersecurity part is very robust, because it has to be. We're talking, tier one in model law speak, a tier one stablecoin issuer who doesn't look after their smart contracts properly can really possibly impact the financial mechanisms, or the whole thing of a country, the whole financial institution of a country. Because you got things like, if the issuer for their reserves takes on the country's government debt and so forth. I'm not a financial person, right? I'm a security person, so just caveats here in terms of what I'm talking about in terms of finance. But the understanding is that if the issuer grabs for their reserves the country's government debt and so forth, and then for some reason they depeg. For example, it's found out that some of the smart contract, the contracts that are used by the stablecoin issuer have vulnerabilities in them, right? And they're about to be hacked. It depegs. Now, the issuer, from my understanding, will need to sell those reserves, or at least some buffers of reserves, in order to try and get the peg stabilized again. Now, the selling of those reserves might ultimately result in a fire sale of those funds or those assets, which means they're selling an asset that is less than they paid for. And that systemic risk flows on into the rest of the financial markets, right? So this is where, the tiering is a lot more pronounced in the model law about this, is how do we actually protect the financial body, or the whole thing of the financial mechanism of a country when you have a tier one issuer come in versus basically a fintech with a really great idea for a certain demographic for a stable coin, right? They're not going to pose a systemic risk to the countries.
Got it. It's risk based proportionality in a way to yeah,
Exactly
regulate.
right.
Yeah, and enable innovation at the same time, and hopefully stabilize the financial ecosystem. And I'm curious, Chris, Mark, when we're talking about the human layer, right, the human risk factor, because yes, we're talking about code, about systems, but at the end of the day, it's human decisions that operate them and monitor them. Do you think we should, codify, I don't know, human operational resilience into law, like from where you sit as an auditor? Do you see that as a blind spot when it comes to segregation of duties, incident response drills, vetting measures? What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I mean, those are all, basic cyber security controls, and the model law has that as well. Addresses incident response, access management, separation of duties, least privilege principle, and so forth. So it is, again, there's requirements in there that address the human weakness. For example, there's got to be security awareness training for all the people in the issuer's organization or community that can impact the security of the stablecoin. They've got to have security awareness training more than once a year, and it's got to be tailor-made to the role that they're suited for. So it's the whole security awareness training done once a year is not fit for purpose in Web3, nowhere near it. And so there's things such as, you should do it at least quarterly, and then that the security awareness training should be basically tailor-made to their specific role. And then every quarter, the training materials should be reviewed to reflect any new attack vectors that have come in. So, and this is where you come into continuous monitoring and improvement. So, it's been around for years, continuous monitoring and improvement. It's even a section, it's a clause in ISO 27001 about continuously monitoring your systems and improving them. And it's very, very important in the Web3 space. And I place a lot of importance, especially when I'm talking to the regulators, about gaining assurance that the licensee or the applicant, the VASP, is actually continuously monitoring their platform. And they need to seek assurance. They need to get comfort that the platform actually understands what that means. And that means making sure that they continuously look at their systems, look at their risk profiles, look at the threat vectors, and adjust accordingly. That's why you have things like blockchain state monitoring. So, for CCSS, like ciphers, they're actually quite a good example of what they can do. And they inspired us to put in one of the requirements where, ciphers have this X feed where they give you warnings on suspicious activity with web wallet transactions and so forth, right? So they were actually, they detected the Bybit or was the Worex hack even before Worex, the Indian exchange, even before they knew what was going on. It was Cypher's continuous monitoring of the blockchain, the wallets that actually alerted the world to the fact that they were actually being hacked in real time. And so this is, again, like a continuously monitoring control.
Mm.
as well. And so we've put requirements in CCSS for that. And it's also in the model law for stablecoins, is that they got to monitor their relevant blockchain state, which is what you got to write it as for standards writing.
Ah, yes. There's this. Yeah, I was thinking when you did mention the technology is there for continuous monitoring. I was think what the first thing that popped to my mind was block explorers. It's coming from a grassroots user perspective. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, if I want to make sure my transactions confirm and sent, I'll just to the right wallet address. I'll check the block explorer, but it's really not user friendly by way of UX at all. Like that there needs to be some kind of basic technical understanding of how smart contracts work before. Yeah.
Oh,
uh,
and
yeah.
there's other controls that SOC 2 and ISO don't cover. For example, blind signing, right, which was
Mm,
part of the Bybit hack. The
yes.
thing was Bybit wasn't hacked. Their service provider was. Their wallet service provider, Safe, was
Uh,
hacked. Okay, so
yeah. Yeah.
a baseline security control for that is service provider management. So obviously you would
Mm,
expect Bybit to have service provider management and do due diligence before you bring a service provider on, what have you, monitor them.
mm,
And so that's the thing there is well, that's a baseline control. That's really old school. Look at making sure your service providers behave themselves. But then you've got things such as, well, continuously monitoring what the state of the blockchain is, or what their components that they're giving you, the oracles, making sure that their oracles are not, in state of manipulation and so forth. And blind signing. So again, this is not a baseline control. The difference, how do you fix blind signing and the techniques around
mm,
that? There's no controls in baseline for that, but there are controls in,
mm,
say, certain frameworks for Web3, and also in CCSS, there's a requirement around verification of funds and destinations before you send, which incorporates, well, do you actually, are you using clear signing controls,
mm.
devices? The other thing there is off-chain verification as well, or what they call I think it's called off-flow verification. Basically, you test the transaction
Oh, yeah,
before
before
run it
right.
real, right? And I think Ledger partnered with Cybers or someone where you could actually test your transaction before you send it for real. And so that's this
Mm.
offline or off-chain verification process as well. So blind signing problems, off-chain verification, all those types of things. They're controls that are very unique to Web3.
Mm. Yeah, very true. And then when you mentioned security awareness exercises, like so at Access we did do a Uniswap Labs panel, and at the end of it we had a quiz, a DeFi safety quiz that was issued by the Uniswap Labs team, but it was again more for like grassroots DeFi users, and it was interesting to see like the how complicated the quiz actually was. Like literally for me, even as a crypto native, I didn't get full marks. It was a bit,
Mm.
but it talked about like yeah the risk factors you described. Like okay, if you're signing this transaction, how do you know whether it's a scam or not? How do you identify these vulnerabilities? And I thought, okay, that's interesting, but I felt that there needs to be a more holistic effort across the ecosystem to kind of how do you say this like really bake this in, not in a I don't know whether you think it should be extremely prescriptive. I would love your thoughts on how on where you sit on the spectrum on controls, or whether it should be completely flexible.
Well,
You don't have to
I
process
suppose the
everything.
thing, yeah, I suppose the thing too is you got to look back and say, well, why have we got these issues in the first place? And it's
Mm,
complexity of the whole transaction process. I mean, you can't pull anyone off the side of the road who's not, aware of crypto and tell them to install MetaMask in their web browser and run a transaction, right? Or create a wallet and then run a transaction. There's absolutely no way someone
mm,
off the street is going to actually be able to do that by themselves without some type of extensive YouTubing. And so, it's the whole reason we've got this type of stuff is that, you're at startup phase, things that are normally hidden and abstracted in the Web 2 space is not there in Web 3 right now. So it's going to be very difficult to get, the rest of the world to embrace this type of new technology unless we start hiding all this complexity and make it as easy for them to transfer funds from one bank account to another. That's the level that we've got to get to in the Web3 space before we even go real mainstream right now. And then we get rid of things like blind signing, and we get rid of things like, off-chain validation of the transaction and so forth. So, and I know that there are projects out there where they're actually trying to abstract all this away, this huge complexity, and make it very simple for people. And that's what they do. Because, a lot of people that I talk to because I present in some cryptocurrency clubs. There's one in Wellington in New Zealand where basically anyone who's interested in cryptocurrency can come and meet with other like-minded people once a month. It's a club. And I gave a presentation to them about, security, basic personal security and so forth. And it was all just a matter of some people that I talk to, they think a seed phrase is like a password to your bank account. So I have this thing that looks like a password, very big password, very complex password, but isn't this a password to my funds? So if I lose this, can I just ring up someone and get it reset? And that's a lot of people, that's what they think about because crypto is finance. So they think back to their bank accounts. They think about passwords. They think about ringing up customer support to reset their passwords. They think about, if I lose my password, I'll just ring up customer support and they'll reset it. All good and done. And then they obviously attribute that to their seed phrase. And well, that's not actually the case. So those type of how we address that over, how we bring that across, that mindset that's been in here for decades, how do we bring that across to the Web3 space is another thing they need to address. And there's things like, social wallets and so forth, or what they call guardians, whereby you create a wallet using a smart contract and you can assign guardians to your wallet. So if you happen to lose your seed phrase or whatever, a couple of guardians will have some type of cryptographic proof or something that can actually help you get your wallet back.
Right.
In the event that you lose your seed phrase. So, it's something new that's coming in. I think Ledger partnered with two other service providers. One of them being like a big vault that would hold this, be a guardian. Of course, it was a huge uproar because obviously, well, in order for that to work, the keys are actually they can be taken out of the HSM, the Ledger device, right? Private keys should never ever be taken out of an HSM. That should be impossible. But for somehow there is some type of thing, backdoor or something that was introduced into the firmware in Ledger that allowed this whole social wallet or guardian protection wallet service to come out. But, the Web3 purists believe that's blasphemy. And, from a security perspective, it is. It breaks the whole HSM model. But that's what Web 2 people, the rest of the world, would expect to have. It's horrifying that this bunch of numbers called a seed phrase, if I lose that, it's game over right now. It's a very weird concept for people who are not used to crypto to come in. And then you got all the complexity of signing transactions and so forth. And so that really needs to be cleaned up before even a lot of the security issues that we have currently are basically sorted out.
Yeah, no, I'm hearing like there's a sense of like, okay, the spirit of custodianship is trying to be instilled over here, like to kind of enable others to take on that risk for you of safeguarding your keys. But somehow, again, it sometimes it's a security risk, and then there's also like, okay, philosophically, like yes, it's like Not your keys, not your crypto. Yeah, that kind of
Yeah.
philosophy. Yeah. So I hear you on this one. And custodianship is a whole other story. That's for another day. So we'll close out on, I know it's time, so I just wanted to ask one final question. Like, for our listeners who want to follow your work at Six Blocks Audit or through your CCSS and ISA contributions, like where's the best place to find you?
Oh, LinkedIn. Unfortunately, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for a lot of people that don't like LinkedIn. I apologize, but that's the best place for me personally. I find LinkedIn incredibly useful for connecting with people around the world, especially
Yeah.
in connecting with academics and other grassroots people that really think about cybersecurity and so forth. It's actually quite good. Of course, I'm on
Mm.
X and some other bits and pieces, but LinkedIn 100%. But then obviously once you connect there, then I normally go on WhatsApp or some of the other things. But if you want to find me, just type my name in LinkedIn. I'm probably the only one with that surname in the world, so you'll find me.
Okay, fab. Actually, I have a bonus question if you're up for it.
Sure.
Okay, if you could pick just one non-negotiable assurance control for regulators to embed today, what would it be?
Ask the licensee, the applicant, to provide a key inventory of their critical keys.
That's a good one.
You'd be surprised at how
Yeah.
many multi-billion-dollar organizations won't have a key inventory. They won't actually understand fully. So a key inventory would be a spreadsheet with all your critical keys, your master keys, whatever, your keys to your cold wallets. And it should say where the key is located, how is it protected when it's not in use, how is it protected when it is being used, how many
Mm,
backups of the key are there, where are the backups located? Because obviously if you get a backup of a signing key, that's
mm,
the signing key. That's it. It's game
yeah.
over. How are the backups protected? Who has access to the backups? Who has access to the operational keys?
Mm,
When was the last time that all the people that had access to the backups and the operational keys, when was the last time they were all reviewed to see whether they still needed access? That one question alone will break quite a few major institutions that you think are very secure.
wow, that's a very, very good question. Maybe something that we can pose to our recently appointed custodian at Access, BitGo. Because we have a ex yeah.
Bitco became CCSS certified.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's good.
Good to know.
That's really, really good. It just came out on, sorry, LinkedIn. It just came out on
Okay.
LinkedIn. Bitco are CCSS certified to level 3.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
great news. Yeah, should go
yeah,
congratulate the team then. Okay,
definitely. So they
fabulous.
will have a key inventory. It's part of the CCSS requirement.
Mm. Okay, very good. Good to know the excess treasury is in good hands.
There
Okay,
you go.
Mark, yes, wonderful speaking to you today, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah,
Okay,
no
I'll put
problem.
the links to your LinkedIn in the show notes as well. Yeah.
No problem. And if you got any excuse to get me over to Singapore, you just say that
Yeah.
I absolutely love Singapore. Any chance to get
Oh,
to
yes.
Singapore, I love
Okay, we'll keep that in mind for sure.
it.
All
No
right.
problem.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mark, and you have a good day.
Bye bye.